Say Something, a video podcast so you can listen and watch. It's like sports talk or news talk, but it's life talk to help us walk the road together. I'm Kay, and thanks for joining me and a few of my friends as we contemplate societal issues and ideas, searching for truth so that together we can say something encouraging to folks walking alongside. Melissa G. Arabian, Food Network star and New York Times bestselling author, chats with us about the powerful way food can play a role in our relationships, not only with people traveling alongside, but with ourselves and with God. Food, at least 3 times a day, every day, crosses our path, often without notice, but for some with heavy shoulds and don'ts. But what if we could see and experience all the goodness, creativity, life, and beauty that comes with food? We are grateful to Melissa, whose professional world centers on food, has contemplated and shared about this powerful topic in her latest book, Tasting Grace, and with us. Thanks for joining the conversation. Here we go.
Okay. And so we are actually driving over to the hotel for our sweet friend Melissa Durabian, who is in town.
Celebrity chef, television host, best-selling author, speaker, writer, and mom of 4, Melissa Durabian is an expert on affordable and healthy family home cooking. Her New York Times best-selling cookbooks have helped thousands of families prepare easy, healthy meals. Now, in her newest book, Tasting Grace, she shares how food not only fills the stomach, but also the soul. Find Melissa at melissadarabian.net or at Melissa Durabian on Instagram.
To share about her new book. It's so great. It's called Tasting Grace. And here's Cynthia Yanoff with Pardon the Mess. So Melissa was in town last night for an event that we put on with a few other ministries and platforms, and it was such an encouraging night. And so we just figured, why not continue the encouragement and be able to share it with more people. So we're excited you're here. We're excited for the people that could come.
Yes.
And so Melissa.
Yes.
What made you want to write a book outside of the cookbook realm? But I love that it has to do with food because that's a part of what your life is.
Well, it's a huge, it's part of all of our lives, right?
Yes.
But it's really a part of my career life too. But also my life as a woman, my life as a mom, feeding kids. And so I've been working in food now for over a decade. And I wanted to explore what God had to say about food. I know what society is saying about food because I'm part of that. I'm part of food culture.
Yeah, that's so true.
And I wanted to lean into what is God saying about food, and how does that inform how I think about food and how I act around food. And so I spent a couple of years reading the Bible, praying, just marinating in this idea of what does God say about food versus what is society saying about food, and what does that mean for me? And I discovered, much to my surprise, that that God has so much good news in food and is using it to draw us closer to Him. And yet I found that there were some attitudes about food, and I'm referring even to my own, that were kind of blocking me from those invitations. And so that's what I explored for several years.
Yeah, because it's so interesting. Even thinking about, there was a gal that stopped me and just even was talking about the ingredients, like the fact that you go down to these levels of just like taking food out of a context that you always know it to be, and almost like it's a non-event because you have to do it every day, and so you don't really even think about it. And about the ingredients not only in the food, but how that even takes it to a wider story of being ingredients in so many things within your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that food gives us a tiny glimpse into the bigger story that God has for us, and His generosity. And His generosity in our food system, I think, is a small glimpse into that deeper generosity. And I think that we can so quickly overlook it and just kind of keep going. You mentioned the ingredients. One of the chapters in Tasting Grace that I write about is our ingredients. I write about ingredients and how that invited me into creativity.
Ooh, how interesting.
And we are all creators, right? Because we are made in the image of our ultimate creator.
Yeah.
And so seeing ingredients as an opportunity to celebrate creation and create and continue the creation that God has made was really a shift in thinking for me. And in Tasting Grace, I talk about this invitation into creation within the context of my life on Food Network Star, and sort of what it was like to be on a reality TV show and to be cooking and under a lot of stress. And so in that whirlwind of all those crazy things, the media storm and the cameras and the stress and everything, I could either get kind of sucked up into that and be, flailed about in that whirlwind, or I could fix my eyes upon something that was solid and true and unmoving. And for me, that was God. So in my Food Network Star experience, my mantra became just get to the ingredients, because God is in the ingredients. I will find God in the ingredients.
That's so cool, because it had to dial down the stress enormously.
Well, it did. It dialed down the stress, but it also shifted it from I got to cook to win a TV show to
like the performance part.
Yeah, it shifted it into really cooking for an audience of one, and cooking not just for God, but with God. And you mentioned earlier how it's ingredients that they sort of speak to a bigger life truth, that it goes outside of the scope of just food.
Yeah.
Even in that, Food Network Star sort of taught me the joy of cooking with God, not just for Him. But that's also true for life, right? Because we don't want to, the joy of living with God is so much deeper than just living a life even for Him, which is easy to do, right? Especially, we can go out on our way, like a book like this, I'm doing it to share God's love. But if I'm not doing it with God, but just for Him, that's a different level. That's a different joy, isn't it?
What did you find? I think, yes, that's so good. And I was curious, when you said you went back and kind of went through the Bible and looked at food, food is so prevalent throughout the Bible. Starting with Adam and Eve, but Jesus' first miracle revolved around wine, right? Was there...
And food, a feast.
Right. And so was there, the Lord's Supper. Is there a theme you found that kind of gave you a little bit of understanding or a little deeper? How did that mold or shape your faith a little bit when you looked into that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that was actually where I went first, was to look in the Bible, and the first place I looked was places where I knew that food was, right? So I kind of immediately went to like Adam and sort of explored that that exchange, and there were so many truths that came out of exploring that that early exchange. The invitation into work, which Adam was told to tend to the garden pre-fall. So the takeaway for me is that work is good and it's worthy. And so when we as a society sort of shun any time in the kitchen and sort of say, well, just get the fastest thing going all the time, we forget that work is actually worthy, and it's not a bad thing. That doesn't mean we need to make a big, huge meal every single day all the time, or put in a lot of work and stress.
Any time,
well,
because you do, and the beauty of eating 3 times a day. It's not like it goes away.
Yes, and
it's sort of constant. Like I tell the kids, it's like the laundry will continue to come. Like, I'm sorry you did it and you put it away in the dishwasher. It never ends. And so
same thing with dinner.
Yes,
it is.
Yeah, you got to eat again today.
But it goes so far, and so I love that you're going to that aspect of the worthiness of the work, whatever it is and whenever it is.
Absolutely,
which is significant.
And I also want people to hear that even though the work is worthy, my call is not one of being the food police that you need to be making. It's life is modern and busy and all of those things, but if we can just reframe some of that work as being worthy, it might change how we feel.
You speak into that about bringing joy back to the dinner table. And I think a lot of us that are listening are interested in that, because I can speak for one as someone that it becomes a task.
Oh, absolutely. You talk about bringing joy back into the work of cooking. There's also bringing joy back into the patience of our food system.
Yeah.
That it takes a long time for, a tomato to grow.
That's a great point.
Or for, stew to stew, or for us to set the table or whatever. And if we can see all of these things as invitations, and maybe not flaws of the food system, but perhaps features of the food system, it can help bring a little bit of that joy back. Now, that doesn't mean that we are always going to enjoy putting dinner on the table every single night and not feel like, and if we are at least aware of those invitations, even if we still are thinking, now I got to do the work of the dishes or the whatever, the good news is, you still got to do the dishes, but the good news is you are going to feel the generosity of God.
It's so true.
When we get in touch with how generous our God is to us, and I'm talking about also, in life, but also in food and how he created food, and the delight and joy that he has created in this food system, which, by the way, he could have created any which way, and he made it delicious. When we are really in touch with the generosity behind the food system that God has given us, it changes our posture from one of taking and entitlement, and I shouldn't have to spend a half an hour, doing dishes and putting things out and whatever. It changes our posture from one of taking to one of receiving. And will that make every single meal you ever make, a total joy to do and clean up after? No. But do I think it will change it fundamentally in a small way? I actually do. I think that's why I wrote the book, because there are so many invitations: invitation into work, invitation into patience, invitation into humility, gratitude, and into
service.
Into the service of hospitality. There's so many invitations in our food system that we are just glossing by. And while I would argue, we owe God more than that, I would also argue that you don't even need to look at these invitations because it's the right thing to do, although it is, right? It's good to glorify God. But I would say you're going to bring the joy back. My hope is that after reading Tasting Grace, people will like their food more, will find greater joy in it, will more deeply find the invitations, the gratitude, and the joy that God is aching to give us through food. And so my hope is that people love food more and more deeply and are more connected to other people and to God after reading. That's my hope.
And it's so good. And I love that you kind of speak into the fact that we've twisted around in culture, because we've made it all about body image and dieting and what's good for us and what's not. And I think you used an example I heard talking about, you can't eat, a tomato because it has too many calories, but I'm going to drink a blue drink that has no calories. And how we've twisted that around. How do you, with your kids, and tell us a little bit about your kids too, so everybody knows, but how do you kind of feed into this of what food is and the value of it, and not, especially with girls, not letting it become something it's not meant to be? Are you intentional about that?
That is so hard. I have 4 daughters that are all, I have 4 teenage daughters, and so they are in the thick of these mixed messages.
Yes. 4 teenage daughters. I just need to make sure everybody paused on that for a minute. 4.
Well, and I will, in all truth, the last 2 are preteens. So they're 14, 13, 12, 12.
That counts.
But, but how to navigate that? That's so hard. So one, I have to remind myself that I am not the food police, right? That I'm not in charge of fixing everybody's, food issues, mine included, and that there's so much grace. There's an invitation into grace with God, right? So we don't have to do any of it perfectly at all. I think the best that I can do is model what I want them to believe, because what we say about ourselves, we start to believe.
That's such a great point.
And
what self-messaging.
What my kids hear me say about myself, they start to believe that must be true for them.
For them as well.
For them as well. So that is probably the best I can do. It is not perfect.
That's like, I mean, it's so huge because you mentioned earlier when we were together, even this morning, about a friend of yours that calls you on the mat, which is part of walking. I mean, we walk the road together for a reason, because we need each other. And share what your friend does when the negative self-messaging is hitting you.
Right. Because I'm
yourself.
I can very
because we're
easily,
the worst.
Yes, we are so rough on ourselves, and I will be the first to, say, oh, I've got childbearing hips, like long before I ever had children, or whatever. Like the things that I say about myself, which I think are, just sort of harmless little self-deprecating remarks.
Yes, it's like a self-deprecation in some weird,
I don't know,
way. Yeah.
And so my girlfriend Karen, who I've been close friends with for 25 years, she says to me, I don't like the way you're talking about my dear friend. And the first time she ever said that to me, 20-some years ago, I was like, wait, what?
Are you like, what friend?
Yeah, I was like,
and then you realize
who are we
it's
talking
you.
about? Well, I'm not talking about someone else. I'm talking about me. And she said something, by saying that kind of got my attention. And she said, I would never let someone else talk that way about you without me jumping in to defend you.
Oh,
and so she said, that includes you. You are not, if you talk that way about you, I'm also going to jump in and call it out. And
what a great way to handle it with our kids too.
Yeah. Yes.
Like, I would let
any of your friends. I just think
or
that's
ourselves.
So powerful.
Right? Our friends, ourselves, or anything.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, I'm just going to talk about the flip side, because one of the themes of Tasting Grace is talking a little bit about those half-truths.
Yes.
That we can so easily go down the slippery slope of half-truths into
it's
really
like little
ugly
snares
spaces.
all around.
And that's where Satan does his best work, right? Is in half-truths.
Yeah, because it sounds pretty good. You're like, well, I do kind of believe some of that. So,
yes. So there is something to be said for we are not meant to be gluttonous. We are meant to move our bodies, and now I'm speaking about the body image and exercise and food and how that all fits in. So we are not meant to have huge quantities of sugar, and we are not meant to do all of that. We are not meant to be gluttonous. But what happens is we start out with this good heart of like, oh, I want to eat healthy, and I want to go to the gym, and I want to move my body, and these are all great, wonderful things. Moving our bodies is glorifying the body that we've been given. I mean, there's something wonderful about that.
Walking. I mean, it doesn't have to. Just moving.
But what happens is that little truth gets layered on with some lies from Satan and society, and next thing you know, we're actually not moving our bodies out of glorifying God, but we're moving bodies because we feel guilty that we had a piece of pumpkin pie yesterday at Thanksgiving dinner. And so we get into this world of guilt and shame and feeling like we need to punish ourselves. We even have language around that. Like, oh, I was so good today. I'm going to have I know this is so bad. I shouldn't, but here I go. This idea of shame around our moving our bodies and food is nowhere in the Bible that I could find. Yeah. And so the really good news that I found in reading and researching Tasting Grace was that it's all gentle, wonderful invitations, and it's joyful generosity from our Creator. It's not he's not wagging his finger at us. And I love that, because I wag the finger so easily to me. And who am I? If Jesus isn't a finger wagger, who am I to be a finger wagger?
I just think it's hard for people to believe just the worth and their identity as the way that God has given it to us. And I think so much of that is that we live in a performance-based society. And I'm just going to say, especially dealing with food or meals or things like that. And so how do you address the performance issue?
Well, we've taken another wonderful truth, which is that we are called in the Bible to be hospitable. right? To welcome the stranger.
Yes, because it's so fun, because it again involves those things like service.
Yes, and you and it feels good to serve.
Yeah.
And we are called to do that. So it all starts out with this like pure heart. And look, I keep doing this whenever I say heart.
But it's like that yet another slippery slope, though. You know,
it's a total slippery slope. As we start out like wanting to serve and create meals for people and make them feel special, but somewhere along that slippery slope, somewhere along that path, we are actually performing and hoping to impress people.
Makes it about
not
us.
welcome them.
Yeah.
And that's when it becomes about us and about impressing. And then our language changes. And so the language becomes, impress your friends with this recipe, or, going on to, Pinterest to find like the recipe that'll be super impressive and whatever. And listen, there's nothing wrong with Pinterest, and there's nothing wrong with great recipes
or making a great meal.
No, there's nothing wrong with it. But it's a slippery slope
when
that we're ignoring.
Yeah.
And then our language is matching where our hearts are, with language like, we're impressing our friends. We're gonna, have them come in. I mean, impressing is the language of separation, and food is not about separation. It's not about division. It's about unification and bringing people together.
Okay, so can we go just a little further on this one, because I think it's so interesting. In so many aspects and capacities of life, you have this performance issue that is eating people alive. It just is. Okay, so in your world, every single day, 365 days a year, you have 3 times to practice every single day not doing the performance thing. And how cool to pave that path based on just, because when you practice it, it becomes a part of you.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I love that you bring up practice, because our meals, who we are at a meal, gives us a lot of practice for who we're going to be outside of our meals. So when we say grace, we are practicing gratitude. When we do the work of sitting down and taking time out, we're practicing a work ethic.
And talking to each other.
Yes, we're practicing those things. So there is a, it's sort of like a sacred microcosm, if you will, of the whole bigger world.
Yes.
And by the way, it's a glimpse, our dining room table and who we are around a dining room table is a small glimpse into, who we are in the world.
Yeah.
But it's also a small glimpse into the ultimate banquet and feast that we are promised. So
it's just so powerful.
Yeah, it is so powerful. And even taking a bite of a granola bar on the go, because listen, life is busy. We can, if we take a moment just to consider the ingredients and who was involved, we can find the invitations and the joy in even that. Even that. So it's not, to just sort of say, well, we'll wait for the farm to table big dinner that we're all sitting around a bit. Yeah, to wait for that is to miss the point. Right.
And just coming from such a place, I love that you're saying, come from a place of gratitude. One, that we have the food, but 2, that we have the opportunity to prepare it for our family, that we can serve others, we can serve the Lord in doing that. That all of it comes from Him. It's His love. It's His way of loving us, that He, like you said, that He gave it taste, and the food is so good. And I mean, it just gives you.
It's just got so many legs on it. I think that it's just hugely deep, and I don't think we think about it.
No, because
it's just a part of everyday stuff, and so you don't think about it. And
in so many of the books and so much of what's out there is all related around maybe some of the more negative aspects of food and dieting and all of that. And so
that's
it's
a great
interesting.
point.
Now, I have a question. Now, how does this all work in with you doing Food Network, where it is a performance because by virtue of entertaining people? And so, like, how do you work through that? And how has that opportunity to be on Food Network also played into your views?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny that you said that about that Food Network you were saying, well, because that like sort of by definition, I'm misquoting you, but by definition that is performance. And it's funny when you said that, I thought, because right. Well, what is interesting is I really think of it as more teaching.
Yes.
And so I think of myself more as a teacher up there and then a performer. That said, it is, I mean, right? That is a slippery slope. And I just want to sort of pick up on that thread of performance and sort of say, listen, the other thing is performance isn't bad. I go and watch a ballet and it's amazing and it's wonderful. I go to my friend Richard Blaze is a great chef. I love watching him do his art and put it on a plate. I love all of that. There's nothing wrong with performance. We should be celebrating and artistic and there's such beauty in that. The slippery slope is performance becoming the proxy for hospitality.
Absolutely.
That's the slippery slope.
Making it identify you and your worth.
Oh,
okay.
Yes.
What I hear you saying is exit the performance when it's somehow opining on your worth. Like, don't do that. But to be able, I think the beauty of even serving a nice meal is the respect that you're giving the people that are there and actually thinking about them, and it's fun. And knowing that people just like to be together.
They like to be invited. And you're giving them multiple gifts. You're giving them the gift of generosity. I mean, you're spending your money. You're giving them time. You're opening your home. There's so many levels.
People just want to be invited.
They do. And now we're kind of talking about multiple things, which is like performance and
we're
art.
In traffic.
But it sounds like we got time. We've got time. Settle in. Yes, I'm looking ahead. We've got plenty of time. Yes. So go get a cup of coffee. We'll still be here.
This is going to be audio in a second.
Yes,
I'm going to read every chapter.
Forget audio books.
And then we're going to ask about every Food Network star, so it's fine.
Yeah, let's just go through the whole list.
Yes.
But performance and artistry and all of that is wonderful and it's amazing. But having people in our homes is really it's different.
No, completely
right?
different. Yes.
And finding our identities and our worth in how well we perform, whether we get the part or not get the part, or whatever, get the Michelin star or not get the Michelin star. Those are some of the slippery slopes of really good things. And I know I keep saying about the slippery slope, but that's where a lot of this is. It's in this. We're not talking about bad things that you need to avoid. I'm instead saying, there are some really good things here, but we're in some slippery slopes, and sort of calling those
being
out
aware.
So we know.
And putting them in their place.
Full perspective on what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
But would you mind sharing, I thought it was sweet, I read it in your book, the story about how the people in the lunchroom in grade school really spoke into you, and I thought that was a beautiful example of hospitality and generosity in a lot of levels. But I would love for you to share that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, the first chapter in Tasting Grace is the chapter about my experience as being my experience being a hungry child in the lunchroom, and I talk about how the lunchroom was really a place where I first understood that we were poor. I was poor growing up, but I didn't know it really because, like many children, I just assumed that my experience was the same as everybody's experience, right? And when I went into my school lunchroom, I realized that was not the case. That's where I realized that I was poor, and I didn't
because of the pecking order in the lunchroom.
There's just there's an unofficial, subtle pecking order that probably most people wouldn't recognize, unless you're at the bottom of it.
Which was
and then you
said that,
recognize it.
Even like Ziploc bags, like the way you describe it. Read the book, but I was like, oh my gosh, I've never thought about the fact.
Because you wouldn't think about it.
Yeah.
And the notes, even in the lunch bag.
Like notes in the lunch bag, like Ziploc bags that, not even the fold over ones, but like the ones with actual zips on them. Foil was something we reused over and over and over again, and like we would never pack a lunch in foil. And even just the heft of the lunch itself, mine was always just very flimsy and light, physically light. And then then the hot lunch kids sort of sat in one area of the lunchroom, which there was a hierarchy, an unspoken hierarchy that you're not aware of unless you are at the bottom of that hierarchy, and that actually is, I believe, true in life,
It
right?
is.
You often don't see the hierarchy unless you are
Unless you're
limited
not
by
in
it.
it.
Well, in that lunchroom, I mean, I encountered so many people who were the hands and feet of Jesus. And I talk about one girl, Katie Rudder. I have no idea where she is in this world, but Katie, but Katie, she always had a little bag of Fritos that she brought to school every day, like as part of her lunch, and she would always share them with me. And she had no idea that I would be really excited to have some Fritos because it was like part of my lunch, like my physical lunch for my stomach. You know, she thought she was just sharing salty Fritos. And she didn't just share her Fritos. She didn't just give me food. She gave me a place at the table. And she allowed me to sit with her and share her life, and we were classmates. And I think about how Jesus, he fed people for sure in miraculous, beautiful, big and bold ways. But he didn't just feed people, he ate with people. He ate with the tax collector. He invited them to the table. And so this idea that that we would not only be called to feed others and to share and to have compassion, much like even the Israelites upon their escape from Egypt, when God gives them the manna and says, everyone collect according to your needs, and then to share with those who don't have enough. We are called to share, but we are also called to share the table space and to eat with. And this idea of that compassion, and this idea that ultimately, really, we are actually all being hosted by God. So it's if we are just the call to sharing food and hosting and being Jesus-like when it comes to compassion and food, is not just to give away food, but it's also to eat with people. And it's not just to eat with people in a way that we are always the host. Right. If I am always the host and I am always staffing the table that is inviting people in, then I don't believe that I'm really fully leaning into what Jesus did when he ate with people, side by side, shoulder to shoulder as equals. So I believe it's also a call to go to other people's tables and not just invite into my own. So I love that story. It's the story that when I've done readings and when I did the audiobook, it's the story that still now I still cry every time I read it aloud.
It's sweet. It's just got so many layers of levels of. I want my kids to be the one that shares, but I also want my kids to bring that person to the table, and I want to do that. And when I make it all about me and performance, or all those things we make food that it's not, we don't have those opportunities to serve well and to love well and invite people to the table. So anyway, that's a great word. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing it up. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you for the great word that you've shared, and even that today you can have a meal with somebody, you can have a snack with whoever's sitting next to you, or even a coffee, and to let it just to sink into the beauty of walking alongside each other, engaging in this beautiful part of creation that the Lord has given us, and just to say a good word to someone today. So we just thank you so much.
Thank you.
Until next time.
Our very special thanks to Melissa D'Arabian. Find Melissa at melissad'arabian.net. And to Cynthia Yanoff with Pardon the Mess podcast. And be sure to check out Melissa's new book, Tasting Grace, Discovering the Power of Food to Connect Us to God, one another, and ourselves. And thank you. Want to stay connected? Visit SaySomethingShow.com and sign up to our mailing list. Or be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, or listen on Apple Podcasts. See you next time on Say Something.